The International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin.
This is one of the most ambitious cases the ICC has ever embarked upon. It highlights the fact sitting heads of state are not above the law.
If nothing else, it's a bold statement. Russia's president, Vladimir Putin, a wanted man, pursued by one of the world's highest courts for his now year-long invasion of Ukraine. The International Criminal Court prosecutes people for the most serious violations of international law. So we're talking about genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity. But the case right now against Vladimir Putin isn't linked to the killing of civilians, attacks on hospitals, cluster bombing of residential buildings, and it isn't about allegations of torture, rape, or the willful slaughter of Ukrainian citizens. It's about what Putin is accused of doing to children. I'm Andrew Chang, you're watching About That. The first thing to understand about Putin's arrest warrant is that there are actually two.
Today, 17th of March 2023, the International Criminal Court has issued two warrants of arrest in the Ukraine situation. For Vladimir Putin, President of the Russian Federation, and for Maria Lvova-Belova, Commissioner of the Russian President for Children's Rights, for the alleged war crimes of deportation of children from Ukrainian occupied territories into the Russian Federation.
Maria Lvova-Belova has been branded by some British media as Putin's child snatcher-in-chief. Her actual title is Russia's Commissioner of Children's Rights. But the accusations against both her and Putin are the same, that they orchestrated the abduction of at least hundreds, potentially thousands of Ukrainian children from their homes and across the border deep into Russian territory, where many of them are still being held.
It is forbidden by international law for occupied powers to transfer civilians from the territory they live in to other territories. Children enjoy special protection under the Geneva Convention.
It's just straight up illegal to do that, even if, as Russia claims, they're doing it for humanitarian reasons.
Outrageous allegations, according to Moscow, which presents the movement of Ukrainian children as a humanitarian campaign.
Last month, Russian President Vladimir Putin told Presidential Commissioner for Children's Rights, Maria Lvova-Belova, Russia was saving children from eastern Ukraine.
You just can't take kids out of their country. And Russia isn't even hiding that it's been doing this. It's announcing it with great fanfare.
One of the notable instances where the abduction of children was actually on public display was on the first anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which was in February 24, and in Luzhniki Stadium in Moscow, where President Putin was speaking at a rally supporting the Russian military.
Thank you, Uncle Yura, for saving me, my sister, and hundreds of thousands of children in Mariupol. I forget a little.
Anya, don't be shy. Go hug Uncle Yuri. Everyone give a hug. Look, it's the man who saved you all.
Several of these Ukrainian children were paraded in front of a crowd of tens of thousands and were coerced into thanking the Russian military for rescuing them from the city of Mariupol, which in fact the Russian military had reduced to rubble through relentless bombardment.
Russia admits to holding at least 1,400 Ukrainian children it says are orphans. At the same time, hundreds of Ukrainian children have been adopted by Russian families, at least 400, according to the Ukrainian Regional Center for Human Rights.
But this is what the Putin regime wants you to see. Helpless Ukrainian orphans greeted with teddy bears by loving Russian couples ready to take them in. In reality, Russia is deporting thousands of children out of Ukraine from areas it invaded and raising them as Russian.
And the Russian commissioner that I mentioned earlier, who now has an international warrant for her arrest, Last month on national television, she told Putin she had adopted a 15-year-old from Mariupol herself. Now, interestingly, it's illegal in Russia for families to adopt children from foreign countries without that country's permission, which it clearly does not have from Ukraine. But in May of last year, Putin signed a decree making it easier to do so, particularly in cases where there are no parents to speak for those children, sometimes because they were arrested by Russian occupying forces or just killed in the war.
Signs point towards a systematic strategy aimed at absorbing the stolen children into Russia. Yevhen was separated from his children at a border checkpoint, just as the family were trying to flee the besieged Mariupol. Imprisoned on suspicion of military links, Yevhen finally released after 45 days to the shock of his life. His children gone.
The children are then assigned Russian citizenship and are often forced to attend re-education camps, where the accusation goes, their Ukrainian identity is effectively erased. Even in cases where there are surviving parents, reunification can be very difficult. According to the United Nations Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine, in all the incidents examined by the Commission, the onus to trace and find parents or family members fell primarily on the children. Parents who tried to track down their children faced considerable logistical, financial, and security challenges in retrieving their children. And witnesses told the Commission that many of the smaller children transferred have not been able to establish contact with their families and might, as a consequence, lose contact with them indefinitely. According to the UN, the forced deportations of Ukrainian children violate international humanitarian law and amount to a war crime.
This is an important moment in the process of justice before the ICC. The judges have reviewed the information and evidence submitted by the prosecutor and determined that there are credible allegations against these persons for the alleged crimes.
So the allegations are clear. The will of the court is clear. The American position is clear too. Here's Kamala Harris speaking at the Munich Security Conference even before the warrant was issued.
In the case of Russia's actions in Ukraine, we have examined the evidence. We know the legal standards. And there is no doubt these are crimes against humanity.
And Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister wrote this on Twitter. Canada welcomes the ICC's decision to issue arrest warrants for President Putin and Commissioner Maria Lvova-Belova for their alleged roles in the egregious scheme to deport Ukrainian children to Russia. Canada stands firmly with the people of Ukraine. Now, to the surprise of absolutely no one, Russia denies it has committed war crimes. And in fact, a day after being accused of war crimes, Putin made a surprise visit to the Russian-occupied Ukrainian city of Mariupol, a city completely ravaged and war-torn that succumbed to some of the worst of Russia's brutality.
1 year ago, this Mariupol theater was used by civilians as a shelter, clearly marked with the Russian word for children. Russia bombed it, killing as many as 600 people. A war crime, UN investigators say, one of a long list revealed in a report today.
Willful killings, torture, inhuman treatment, unlawful confinement, rape, as well as unlawful transfer and deportation.
But here's where things get complicated. Russia says the arrest warrant has no significance whatsoever. And it's not entirely wrong. To fall under the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, you have to be a member of the International Criminal Court. Russia is not.
Russian police are not going to be putting handcuffs on Vladimir Putin. Russia does not recognize the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. Dmitry Medvedev, a Putin ally, he wrote this: "No need to explain where this paper should be used," and he followed that with an emoji of a toilet roll.
And that is the most immediate problem here, that Russia would never extradite its own people, never mind its own president, for criminal prosecution. And the ICC itself has no police force to enforce its own warrant.
The ICC is doing its part of work. As a court of law, the judges issued arrest warrants. Their execution depends on international cooperation.
So, the thinking goes, the most straightforward way for Putin to stand trial before the International Criminal Court at The Hague would be if he travels to a country that is a member of the court. But here's the problem. Some of the most populous, powerful countries in the world are not members of the ICC. China, not a member. Neither is India, not even the United States. And even Ukraine itself is not a member of the International Criminal Court. Canada is, but nobody's expecting Putin to visit us anytime soon. Still, there is no denying that this arrest warrant makes Putin's world just a little bit smaller. And I'll give you an example. You know, even for a non-member state like India, there's an upcoming G20 meeting in Delhi this September, and Russia is part of the G20. If Putin were to travel there, what would India's prime minister do? What would he feel that the international pressure is on him to do? But let's be real here. Vladimir Putin is no fool, and he wouldn't knowingly put himself in a position where he risks losing everything. Although, time might eventually work against him.
We have to bear in mind that although the famous expression is that justice delayed is justice denied, in international criminal justice, justice delayed very often is justice delivered, because those who are in power today may not be in power tomorrow.
There is a history of alleged war criminals who have been arrested in member states and then held in detention. 21 of 38 arrest warrants issued by the ICC. Now, Putin is totally a rare case. Only the third serving president ever to be issued an ICC arrest warrant. Sudan's Omar al-Bashir is still on the run. Libya's Muammar Gaddafi is dead. But the fact is, dictators have gone from feeling safe and secure in their strongholds only to eventually have their own people turn against them. Serbia's Slobodan Milosevic is maybe the most notable example. He went on trial for war crimes in Croatia, Bosnia, and Kosovo in the 1990s after being ousted from office constitutionally, effectively handed over by his own country for international trial. There was a time when nobody thought he would face justice.
I think that this is really a moment of truth for the international community, for the rule of law, and if thousands of children can be abducted with impunity, and if the international community allows that to stand, I believe that it would indeed be a dark moment for all of us. My hope is that the world community will not allow the perpetrators to enjoy impunity, and that they will somehow, someday be brought to justice.
Now next, I'm going to speak with a freelance journalist who has been to Ukraine multiple times over the course of the war, who's also covered the Ukrainian conflict extensively. And we're going to talk about how they feel about this warrant after the break. Hey, welcome back to About That. So during the program, we have been exploring how this recent International Criminal Court arrest warrant, what it means for Russia's president, Vladimir Putin, given the gravity of the charge itself. But right now, we'd like to explore a little bit of how this plays in Ukraine itself, with Ukrainians. So joining us, we have freelance journalist Sarah Larniak. Sarah, you've covered extensively the war in Ukraine. We're linking up with you in London right now, overseas. But can you tell us how Ukrainians are receiving this news?
Well, Andrew, it was interesting when the news broke that this arrest warrant had been issued. Ukrainians responded very much in the same way that they've responded to so much in this conflict, and a lot of that had to do with jokes and memes online. really, I think, highlighting that sense of humor that they have and the resilience of the country. But what I also heard from other people I spoke with was that, yeah, there's joking. Yes, they're willing to they were using ChatGPT to mock up photos of President Putin in a jumpsuit, things like that. But it also masks that immense amount of pain. I think Ukrainians are really coming to terms with the fact that because this arrest warrant is so historic, there's some moments in this conflict that just really make them realize that they're living through that history that we just speak of in hushed tones, like Darfur, like Afghanistan. Like, we speak about it in a different way, and they're realizing that those are their lives now. And so all of the horror that this arrest warrant masks is also there, kind of beneath the surface of humor and a good-natured conversation about this.
Mm-hmm. And to some extent, this must seem very, very real to them as well, because we have seen Russians stand trial in Ukraine, right? Officials,
Mm-hmm.
even soldiers, for war crimes.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think since the beginning of the invasion, Ukrainians have been really determined to demonstrate what makes them different. So many people around the world were confused about what's a Ukrainian versus a Russian. And Ukrainians will fundamentally always come back to what makes them different, and that pursuit of justice through the court system, not through any, haphazard soldiers taking Russian soldiers out back. It's not like that. They want to see justice done. They want to see justice done the proper way. And so that's happening in Ukraine. There was a horrific story that came out last week where court documents showed that 2 Russian soldiers standing trial stood accused of gang raping a mother and forcing her husband to watch before they started sexually assaulting their 4-year-old daughter, the court documents say, that they wanted to make a woman out of her. These are the kinds of crimes that we're not broadly seeing yet because they happen behind closed doors. And so these court cases are very important. They bring out the stories that we're not seeing on the streets because they've happened in the secrecy of homes, and they really do. They're the worst things that human beings can do to one another. And so that these court cases are going ahead, that this arrest warrant for the person in charge of this invasion has been issued, that is all very significant. And I think a lot of people have talked about whether or not it matters, whether or not Russian President Vladimir Putin will ever end up behind bars, if it's just symbolic. I think justice served is very important to the Ukrainian people, even if that is delayed from now.
Right, but let me ask you this. I mean, given the severity of the accusations we have seen, are Ukrainians or even are you surprised by the specific allegation that we're seeing in this International Criminal Court arrest warrant? Because we have seen so many allegations of war crimes over the last year. Right. Like, I would not have predicted that this one, even though it involves children, would have been the first that we may potentially see being prosecuted before the ICC.
Right. And I do think it's important to say that it's the first. It isn't necessarily the last. So what it means that he's being, has this arrest warrant put forward on this charge specifically is that they actually have evidence that he has been personally responsible in orchestrating that crime of moving more than 10,000 Ukrainian children out of Ukraine and into Russia. That is the crime, and there is evidence, according to the court, that he has been specifically responsible. That other case I spoke about of those 2 Russian soldiers, you cannot make the case that Russian President Vladimir Putin is personally responsible for that act of violence. And so that's kind of the difference, is that there are countless war crimes being committed in Ukraine, and they have to be prosecuted on the level of responsibility. And there is a possibility that in the future, the systemic use of torture could be added to the list. This is something we've seen with past prosecutions, is that systemic use of torture or rape can be added to the list. We haven't seen that yet, but it is a matter of being able to find the evidence that Russian President Vladimir Putin can be reasonably personally responsible for what we're seeing.
One last question for you, Sarah. Does this make Putin a more dangerous man in the sense that this arrest warrant, I mean, you know, it makes his world a little bit smaller, certainly. But, you know, I've read opinions online that say, well, maybe this also pushes his back a little closer to the wall. Maybe this pushes him a little closer to other allies, like China, for example.
Maybe, but I don't see it that way. I see it as a conflict where he already had his back up against the wall. Ever since this invasion failed to materialize as he expected it to, he risked embarrassment. Russian President Vladimir Putin has shown again and again that he is very tied up in this idea of legacy. And if he cannot achieve this image he has in his head of creating that greater Russian nation of, you know, past centuries, that is already a failure to him. His back was already up against a wall. And I think that this charge, this arrest warrant means for sure that this will be another part of his legacy. So he can be as obsessed with his legacy as he wants, but he will also have been tried as a war criminal now.
Sarah Lorniak, a freelance journalist who's covered the conflict in Ukraine extensively. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been helpful.
Thanks, Andrew.
And we'll be right back after this. Hey, welcome back to About That. So, you know, for all the substance and symbolism of the International Criminal Court arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin, one thing we should mention here is that neither Putin nor Putin's allies are taking this lying down. A Russian investigative committee has said that it has opened a criminal case against ICC prosecutor Karim Khan and 3 of its judges, calling their issuance of an arrest warrant obviously illegal. A Russian senator wrote on Telegram, "The ICC is on the road to self-destruction with such an absurd decision." And one more thing I want to read for you. This is perhaps the most ominous warning of all from former President Dmitry Medvedev of Russia. He says, "It's quite possible to imagine a surgical application of a hypersonic Onyx," that's a missile, "from a Russian ship in the North Sea on the Hague courthouse." He adds, "So, judges, look carefully to the sky." I'm Andrew Chang. You've been watching About That. We'll see you tomorrow.